Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Breaking Down the Wall, a look behind the global media's coverage of the Gaza story. Reporting Serbia, are journalists trapped in the past? The typo that turned a presidential hopeful into Mitt Romney. And Tom Cruise gets his big American Idol audition.
What's up, man?
Tell me something interesting about you.
Being a Scientologist.
But has he got what it takes? Welcome back. The pictures from the border told the story. A brief escape for a tide of people starved of basic necessities. So why were the actions of thousands of Palestinians who were denied access to electricity, food, and medicine by an Israeli blockade reported by so many in the media as a mere shopping spree? Have the media played down the importance of the dramatic story on the Egypt-Gaza border? After all, this is not the first time that walls have come tumbling down in front of television cameras. That's our starting point this week: the media, the wall, and the coverage of Gaza. The first rush of coverage was picture-driven. The images of a collapsed wall, thousands of Palestinians crossing into Egypt, buying almost everything they could get their hands on.
It was a great media event. Those biblical images of the masses, this exodus out of Gaza to buy supplies, this whole streaming over to freedom and to food and to the supplies that were needed was, I think, very strong in terms of imagery and drew, again, attention to the Palestinian plight in Gaza.
Breaking the siege on Gaza by breaking down the wall that separated it from the world sent tens of thousands of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip into Egypt. These crowds look to what lies behind these borders in the hope of reaching the bank of Sinai.
At least that's the way Arabic language media reported the story.
The Arab media, of course, has largely expressed horror at what's going on, at the scale of all of this, and indeed a noticeable aspect of this crisis, the total lack of international outrage from key states, including, I'm afraid to say, Britain. I think this is really reflected in the Arabic media. You don't see it so much in the Western media. So off they were going, get these products from Egypt. I remember somebody describing them like swarms of locusts.
This morning, absolute craziness on the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt.
In fact, coverage in the Western media quickly shifted. By the second day, the narrative had taken a turn. The fall of the wall at Rafah was characterized as less of a humanitarian story, more of a commercial exercise. Palestinians as bargain hunters.
Gaza residents flooding across the breach barrier, many buying up food and fuel to return home with.
Now, you could make that into a trivial event, or you could use it to show how it is completely normal people with normal lives who are being blockaded in Gaza, and how they're trying to continue with their normal lives.
I think there is something to be said about the media's coverage of the felling of the Gaza wall, the trivialization of the incident, and failing to put it in its proper political and historical context.
Both sides fight to get the media to contextualize the story their way. The Palestinians say Israel's blockade denies them food, fuel, and medical supplies. The Israelis argue that is the direct result of Palestinians firing rockets at Israeli civilians. With its time constraints, largely self-imposed, television news often falls short on context. The focus tends to be on what happened, rather than the reasons that led to the event.
The felling of the wall also came after a prolonged period of siege, something that, while mentioned in the media, also was not properly explained. Gaza has been under siege, of course, in one degree or another for more than 10 years. The siege has only intensified since last June, a siege that has come, of course, as a result of the Palestinian will and desire to freely and fairly elect their government.
Why does the media fail to refer to the wider context in all the factors that make it up? The issue of who controls the border. How does the border work between Egypt and Palestine? Newspapers and the media are content actually to quote Israeli officials.
Israel says it had every reason to do that. It was trying to stop repeated rocket attacks into southern Israel that have held its communities there virtual hostage.
I think obviously American coverage is always trying to bring into account the Israeli security needs, how much is this endangering the success of the peace process that they're trying to promote, how will this impact Bush's chances of achieving anything in the Middle East.
Israeli media featured analysts who tried to counter the impression that Palestinians were the victims in this story.
Israel says the Palestinians are blowing the situation out of proportion.
If you look at the last 2 days, the Hamas has won because the media throughout the world are buying the charade that Israel is somehow using illegitimate measures against the Gaza Strip.
Well, the media was largely divided between those who thought this was a last gasp rush for freedom and those who thought it was like a jailbreak of potential terrorists who had broken out and therefore created a massive security scare in the region.
History does not deal in exact parallels, and there are big differences between the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and what happened in Gaza recently. However, the biggest difference of all was in the way the stories were covered.
In 2005, when the wall was first breached, the Israeli peace movement Gush Shalom made a very poignant observation. They published an ad in the Israeli daily Haaretz in which they said when the Berlin Wall fell, families and relatives could be seen reuniting in these emotional scenes all across the wall, and the world applauded. But when the same thing happened across the Rafah wall in 2005, and again, of course, a few days ago, when family members from either side of the divided town of Rafah were able to reunite for the first time in decades, instead of applauding, the United States and Israel immediately decried the incident as a security breach and demanded that the wall go up.
I would say that this really is a brilliant opportunity for people to think about walls in general and to consider how the world applauded the fall of the Berlin Wall, for example. What the media is doing actually distances the public in the West from the events that are going on. And I believe that the normal person, the man in the street, as it were, does care about justice and about human rights, and that therefore, if there was genuinely proper coverage, it could not fail but have an effect.
Our Global Village Voices now and their take on the fall of the wall between Gaza and Egypt.
I don't think the British media really portrayed the way the Palestinians really are in a good way, because they've showed them as a couple of thugs, or hundreds of thugs, going through, breaking down a wall, trying to escape from something they shouldn't be escaping from. But the way I think they should have portrayed it is actually sitting down and talking to some of the families, finding out what they've been through.
The British media and the English speaker media, they focus on the current event. They take the event from its context. They don't focus about the causes, the reasons of the disasters taking place in Gaza. They show some pictures for people who are running from Gaza to Egypt without considering the real reasons why these people are migrating from this place to Egypt.
You should consider our Global Village Voice segment as your platform to comment on the triumphs and shortcomings of the news media around the world. Just email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net and we'll find a way to get your voice on the air. Our News Bite section this week starts with restrictions on reporting from two countries. Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, has jailed another dissident, a poet, who came up with an imaginative way to criticize the country's military rulers. The poet, Saw Wei, published what looked like a harmless romantic poem in a popular weekly magazine. But censors decoded the poem and found that the first word of each line read vertically spell out the phrase power-crazy senior general Than Shwe. Than Shwe is the leader of Myanmar's military government. The magazine was taken off the shelves. The author of the poem was arrested. Than Shwe took a similar hit last year in the Myanmar Times. It was an ad for a fictitious Swedish travel agency, but read the name out backwards and it spells out Killer Than Shwe. And for 16 years, Iran's leading magazine for women, Zanan, has been using subtle and creative ways to get around government censors there. But now it's out of business. The government has refused to renew the magazine's license, forcing it to close. Its editor, Shala Shirkat, was accused by the authorities of offering a dark picture of the Islamic Republic, compromising the psyche and the mental health of readers, and providing morally questionable information. For years, Zanan has dealt with controversial topics in Iranian society, such as domestic violence and women's rights. Kenya's Human Rights Commission is blaming at least some of the ongoing ethnic violence in that country on hate-filled radio broadcasts. In a story that's disturbingly reminiscent of what happened in Rwanda in 1994, some programs and songs played on community radio stations have been blamed for inciting some of the violence. It's thinly veiled, says a human rights official, but it's clearly hate speech. Kenya has recently seen an explosion in the number of private radio stations that serve rural areas that lack access to television or newspapers. A cautionary tale to journalists and newspaper editors everywhere: beware of spell check, and especially that agent of convenience, replace all. The biggest selling Sunday broadsheet paper in Britain, the Sunday Times, produced this piece on U.S. Republican presidential hopeful Mitt Romney. At least that's how they spelled his name. And the Times didn't just misspell Mitt Romney's name once, they did it 23 times, including the Romney family, the Romney campaign, and one voter who admitted he was leaning towards Romney. An American media watch group is hitting one of the country's best-known radio shock jocks where it hurts. It's targeting his advertisers. Michael Savage is a right-wing talk radio host who used to appear on MSNBC TV.
What's on your mind?
Hi, Savage. Don't cut me off, but I think you're bordering on racism on this issue.
Oh, I'm so sorry, sir.
Well,
may I apologize to you? Am I a racist?
Wait a second.
Am I also an evil man because I brought up common sense? You're a moron.
He's been criticized by, among others, the Council on American Islamic Relations for radio rants like this.
I'm so sick of them. I'm so sick of the brainwashing about Islam and Muslims and the Quran. Shove it!
Robert Greenwald's film company, Brave New Films, has launched a No Savage campaign, calling on the public to take its complaints to companies advertising on Savage's show, which claims to have a daily audience of 8 million Americans. So far, 4 sponsors have pulled their ads, but many big corporate names like Advil, Geico, Office Depot, and Direct Buy are still affiliated with the broadcast. Michael Savage isn't the shock jock's real name. He was born Michael Wiener. Doesn't really have the same ring to it, though. We're back after the break with a story on the Serbian media gearing up for elections.